A Virginia Senate committee advanced several bills that would tighten gun laws. One bill would create a Class 1 misdemeanor.
Back in 1776, Virginia's Article 1, Section 13 protected your right to arms.
They have no place in our communities. Neither do the extended magazines that contribute to so much misery.
The American people deserve and they have the right to defend themselves, and that's what we're fighting for.
It will drastically change how the landscape will look for Second Amendment rights in Virginia.
And if you are convicted of it, then you would be barred from owning firearms for at least 3 years post-conviction.
A brand new version of a bill just dropped in Virginia, and when you actually read it line by line, you start to realize this thing doesn't just target one specific type of firearm. It reaches into your rifle safe, it reaches into your pistol case, it reaches into your shotgun rack, and the definitions they're using are so absurdly broad that the vast majority of modern firearms Americans own right now could suddenly become illegal to carry the moment you step outside your front door. But here's the part that caught my attention more than anything else, and we'll get into this deeper shortly. Local sheriffs across the state are already saying they may flat out refuse to enforce it. That tension between lawmakers and law enforcement is something you need to understand, because what's unfolding in Virginia right now could set a precedent that ripples across the entire country. Let's break down exactly what this legislation says, what firearms it actually affects, where the restrictions apply, and why every gun owner in America, not just Virginians, should be watching this closely. The document in question is Senate Bill 727, specifically a House substitute version that was introduced roughly 2 weeks ago. This bill seeks to amend sections of the Virginia Code dealing with restrictions on carrying certain firearms in public areas. And the title alone tells you exactly where this is heading. The title reads, "Carrying Assault Weapons in Public Areas Prohibited." Now, every single time politicians start throwing around vague, politically charged terms like assault weapons or assault firearms, that should immediately set off alarm bells. Because historically, those definitions never stay narrow. They always expand far beyond what the average person assumes they mean when they first hear the phrase. Most people hear assault weapon and they think of some military-grade, fully automatic weapon of war, but that's not what these bills target. What they actually target, once you dig into the text, is an enormous swath of commonly owned everyday firearms, and that's precisely what's happening here. According to the language in this bill, it would become unlawful to carry certain defined firearms on or about your person in public places. And when they say public places, they're not talking about a short list of sensitive government buildings or courthouses. The bill specifically lists public streets, sidewalks, roads, public parks, public rights of way, and essentially any place that is open to the general public. Think about that for a moment. That covers virtually everywhere a law-abiding citizen might need to defend themselves. The grocery store parking lot, the sidewalk outside your home, the park where your kids play, the route you walk every single evening. Everywhere you currently have the legal right to carry would suddenly become a restricted zone under this proposal. This is not a narrow, targeted piece of legislation. This is a sweeping prohibition that reaches almost anywhere a citizen might lawfully carry a firearm today. And that alone should concern everyone, regardless of where you fall on the political spectrum, because the fundamental question here is whether the government has the authority to effectively eliminate your ability to carry a firearm outside the four walls of your home. The Constitution says they don't, and the founders were extraordinarily clear about that. James Madison, writing in Federalist 46, stated that the advantage of being armed, which the Americans possess over the people of almost every other nation, was a critical structural protection for liberty. He wasn't describing a privilege that the government graciously extended to the people. He was describing an inherent right that the people possessed and that the government was duty-bound to respect. The entire framework of the Second Amendment was built on the understanding that an armed citizenry was essential to the preservation of freedom, not something the government should chip away at one bill at a time. Now let's get into the specific firearms this bill targets, because this is where your eyes are really going to widen. The first category is semi-automatic centerfire rifles, and when you look at the features that trigger the restriction, you quickly realize this covers almost all of them. Under the proposed language, a rifle becomes restricted if it includes features such as a folding or telescoping stock, a thumbhole stock, a pistol grip, an additional forward grip, a threaded barrel capable of accepting muzzle devices or suppressors, or certain detachable magazine configurations. If you own a modern AR-15 platform rifle, you already recognize every single one of those descriptions. These are the same feature-based definitions that have appeared in so-called assault weapon bans across the country for decades. And what that means in practical terms is that this bill could apply to an enormous portion of the most commonly owned rifles in America. Rifles that the Supreme Court has already indicated the government cannot simply ban. And that brings us to a warning from the founding era that feels almost prophetic. George Mason, during the ratification debates, said plainly, "To disarm the people is the best and most effectual way to enslave them." Mason wasn't talking about muskets specifically. He was warning about the government gaining the ability to control what arms the people could possess and carry. That warning feels uncomfortably relevant when you read through a bill like this one. But here's the thing, the bill doesn't stop at rifles. Not even close. It also applies to semi-automatic pistols. Under the proposed language, pistols could fall into the restricted category if they have features such as a threaded barrel, a barrel shroud, a forward grip, or a magazine that attaches outside of the pistol grip. Those definitions would sweep up many AR-style pistols and a wide range of modern handgun configurations that millions of Americans currently own and carry legally. The breadth of the language here is genuinely staggering when you sit down and read it carefully. And then there are semi-automatic shotguns. According to the legislation, shotguns with characteristics like a folding or telescoping stock, a pistol grip, a detachable magazine, or a fixed magazine larger than 7 rounds would fall under the prohibited category as well. So when you take a step back and look at the full picture, this bill doesn't regulate one type of firearm. It potentially affects rifles, pistols, and shotguns simultaneously. That's the entire spectrum of what most American gun owners possess. And the way the definitions are written, using cosmetic and accessory-based features rather than functional capability, means that firearms which operate identically to unrestricted models could suddenly become prohibited simply because they have a pistol grip or a threaded barrel. The firearm functions the same way. It fires the same ammunition at the same rate. But because of a cosmetic feature, carrying it outside your home becomes a criminal act. That's the logic driving this legislation. There's another element woven into this bill that deserves attention, and that's magazine capacity. The bill references firearms equipped with magazines capable of holding more than 20 rounds. This is a tactic lawmakers frequently use to regulate firearms indirectly. Rather than banning the firearm itself, they restrict the magazine capacity, effectively making the firearm less useful or creating legal landmines for owners who possess standard capacity magazines that came with the firearm from the factory. It's regulation through the back door, and it's been a go-to strategy in anti-gun legislation for years. The founders were remarkably clear on this point as well. They believed that people should possess arms comparable to those used in common service. Tench Cox, writing in 1789, explained the meaning of the Second Amendment this way: "The people are confirmed by the next article in their right to keep and bear their private arms, not government-approved arms, not limited arms, not arms that meet a bureaucratic checklist of acceptable features, private arms belonging to the people." The bill also prohibits carrying any firearm capable of accepting belt-fed ammunition devices. While those are rarer among everyday citizens, this provision reveals the underlying strategy at work. Once lawmakers begin expanding categories and definitions, the scope of what gets restricted grows and grows until very little remains outside the net. Now here's where the consequences become very real for individuals. Violating this law would constitute a Class 1 misdemeanor in Virginia. That means up to 12 months in jail, significant financial penalties, and a permanent criminal record. All for carrying a firearm that was perfectly legal yesterday, but now meets a government-defined list of prohibited features. A law-abiding citizen who has carried the same firearm responsibly for years could wake up one morning as a criminal, not because they did anything wrong, but because politicians redefined what's acceptable. And here's a detail in the legislation itself that's deeply telling. The fiscal impact statement associated with this bill actually estimates additional imprisonment costs that would result from enforcing it. The lawmakers who wrote this bill know it will put more people behind bars. They've calculated the cost of doing so, and they're moving forward anyway. The founding-era writer Noah Webster warned about exactly this kind of gradual erosion in 1787 when he wrote, "Before a standing army can rule, the people must be disarmed." The preservation of liberty, in the founders' view, depended on the people themselves retaining arms, not just soldiers, not just law enforcement, the people. And today, after the Supreme Court's decision in New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin, the government bears the burden of justifying that any firearm restriction falls in line with our nation's historical tradition of firearms regulation. That's the legal standard now, and the central question courts will have to wrestle with regarding a bill like this is straightforward. Is there any historical tradition in America of banning commonly owned firearms from being carried in public based on cosmetic features? The answer, based on everything we know about American history and jurisprudence, is no. And that debate is playing out in courtrooms across the country as we speak. But here's where this story takes a fascinating turn that adds an entirely new dimension. It's not just gun owners raising concerns about these proposals. It's local law enforcement. Multiple sheriffs across central Virginia have publicly pushed back against gun legislation moving through the General Assembly, arguing that these proposals overstep the Constitution and infringe on rights that they swore an oath to protect. Amherst County Sheriff L.J. Aries has been one of the most vocal, stating that lawmakers are using definitions that are simply too broad. Sheriff Aries said directly, "You want to say it's an assault weapon, but the Second Amendment guarantees us the right to bear arms." That's a sitting sheriff publicly challenging the foundation of this legislation. And he went further, making it clear that if bills like this pass, he has serious concerns about enforcing them. He stated plainly that he cannot support legislation that infringes on constitutional rights. He's not alone either. Henry County Sheriff Wayne Davis echoed those concerns and pointed out a glaring inconsistency that's become increasingly hard for lawmakers to defend. Davis noted that an individual at 18 years old can enlist in the military and go to war, but under proposals like these, that same person would be told they cannot lawfully purchase or carry a firearm at home. That contradiction strikes at the heart of the credibility gap in much of modern gun control legislation. And here's where things get particularly interesting. Some of these sheriffs have indicated that if they believe new laws violate the Constitution, they may refuse to enforce them entirely. Sheriff Davis explained that if officials firmly believe a law violates the Constitution, it would be their duty not to enforce it. That's not a radical statement. That's an officer upholding his oath. This dynamic isn't new in Virginia. Back in 2019, dozens of local governments declared themselves Second Amendment sanctuaries, signaling they would resist enforcing gun restrictions they believed violated constitutional rights. And now, with this new wave of legislation, those declarations are being reaffirmed across the state. Sheriffs in rural parts of Virginia argue that these proposals threaten a deeply rooted way of life where firearms are commonly used for hunting, sport shooting, and personal defense. They contend that the proposed laws would primarily burden law-abiding citizens while doing virtually nothing to deter criminals who, by definition, don't follow laws in the first place. Sheriff Aries put it as bluntly as anyone when he said that the changes being proposed would only affect people who are already following the law. And that's the fundamental paradox of legislation like this. The people who comply with the law are the ones who get punished. The people who ignore the law continue ignoring it, regardless of what's written on paper. There's also a federal dimension developing here that's worth noting. Officials at the federal level have reportedly indicated they're watching this bill closely, and there are signals that if Virginia moves forward with passage, constitutional challenges will follow swiftly. The possibility of an immediate injunction could prevent the law from taking effect while courts determine its constitutionality, but even the process of passing such a law, forcing citizens to live under the threat of prosecution while legal challenges work their way through the system, represents a form of infringement in itself. When you read through the actual text of this legislation from top to bottom, what becomes undeniably clear is that it reaches far beyond any single firearm platform. It sweeps across rifles, pistols, and shotguns, using definitions so expansive that the majority of modern firearms Americans own could potentially fall within its scope. And the restrictions don't apply to some narrow list of sensitive locations. They apply to virtually every public space where a citizen might walk, drive, or stand. This is a bill that every gun owner in Virginia needs to be aware of, And every gun owner across the country should be watching, because the strategies and language being used here will inevitably appear in other states. The definitions, the feature-based restrictions, the sweeping geographic prohibitions. These are templates that get replicated once they gain a foothold. Stay informed, stay engaged, know what legislation is moving through your state. Read the actual text of the bills, not just the headlines, because the details buried in the language are always where the real story lives. That's it for today, folks. See you in the next video.